An HOA's illegal overreach shatters a family's peace, seizing a child's puppy on private land. But they didn't count on one thing: the girl's father is the police chief. Witness the electrifying moment a dad in uniform arrives, armed with the law, to turn a Karen's complaint and HOA tyranny into a fight for justice you won't believe. What happens when unchecked power meets an unbreakable protector? Stay tuned. The dust kicked up by the tires of the Homeowners Association patrol vehicle settled slowly, like a shroud over the usually peaceful entrance to Hank's sprawling 10-acre ranch. It was a property that had been in his family for generations, a sanctuary far removed. Or so he'd thought. From the petty squabbles and overreach of suburban HOAs, his daughter, 8-year-old Emily, was out near the front pasture with Daisy, her beloved golden retriever puppy, a joyful, yipping fur ball that was more tumble than terror. The sight of the official-looking vehicle, stark white with the Bridal Creek Estates HOA enforcement emblem emblazoned on its side, sent an immediate caused spike of unease through Hank. He was off duty, enjoying a rare Saturday morning. But the instincts of a police chief were never truly dormant. He'd heard whispers. Of course, Bridal Creek Estates, a newer, more exclusive development, had been creeping closer to the established ranches in the area. Their HOA was notoriously aggressive, known for its nitpicking rules and officious enforcers, but they had no jurisdiction here. On his land, this was unincorporated county territory, governed by county laws, not the covenants, conditions, and restrictions of a housing tract miles down the road. Before Hank could even reach his front porch, he saw them, 3 figures in quasi-official uniforms, a man and 2 women, approaching Emily. One of them, a stout woman with a clipboard clutched like a weapon, was speaking to his daughter in a tone that even from a distance sounded condescending and sharp. Emily, small and sensitive, looked bewildered, her lower lip trembling as she clutched Daisy protectively. The puppy, sensing Emily's distress, let out a series of anxious yelps, a woman Hank recognized vaguely from a contentious county zoning meeting months prior, a Karen if ever there was one, whose name he now recalled as Janice Pruitt, stood a little way off, arms crossed, a smug expression plastered on her face. She was a resident of Bridal Creek and had been vocal about the unruly nature of the older ranches bordering their pristine development. Hank's blood began to simmer. This had Pruitt's fingerprints all over it. He quickened his pace, his long strides eating up the distance. "Emily, honey, what's going on?" he called out, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. The 3 HOA officers turned, startled. The stout woman, whose name tag read Doris, frowned. "Sir, are you the owner of this animal?" she asked, gesturing dismissively toward Daisy. "I'm Hank Miller, and this is my property. That's my daughter, Emily, and her dog, Daisy," Hank replied, his eyes flinty. "Now, why are you on my land, harassing my child?" Doris puffed herself up. "We've received a complaint about an unlicensed and uncontained animal. According to Bridal Creek Estates HOA regulations, all pets must be registered and leashed when outside of a fenced yard." Hank felt a muscle twitch in his jaw. "First, this isn't Bridal Creek Estates. Your HOA has zero authority here. Second, Daisy is on our private property and well within our boundaries. And third," he paused, his gaze sweeping over the 3 of them, "you're trespassing." The male officer, younger and looking distinctly uncomfortable, shifted his weight. "Ma'am," he began, looking at Doris, "maybe we should check the jurisdiction maps again." "Nonsense. Officer Miller clearly stated this is his property," Doris snapped, misinterpreting the man's attempt at caution. She then turned to Janice Pruitt. "Mrs. Pruitt has filed a formal complaint. She stated the dog was running loose near the access road earlier." "Near the access road on my property," Hank corrected, his voice dropping a decibel, becoming dangerously quiet. "An access road that is also part of my land. And for the record, Emily was supervising her puppy, as she always does." Emily, emboldened by her father's presence, spoke up, her voice small but clear. "Daisy was just playing fetch with me. Daddy, she didn't go anywhere near Mrs. Pruitt. Tears welled in her eyes. Are they going to take Daisy? The question hung in the air, sharp and painful. Doris, seeming to relish the moment, consulted her clipboard. As per HOA Section 4, subsection B, regarding unregistered animals posing a potential nuisance, we are authorized to seize the animal until compliance is met. That means payment of fines and proof of registration with the Bridal Creek Pet Committee. Seized my dog, Hank's voice was incredulous. But beneath it, a cold fury was building. You think you're going to come onto my private land based on the complaint of someone who doesn't even live under your HOA's imaginary reach here, and take my daughter's puppy? We are HOA enforcement, sir. The third officer, a thin woman with severe glasses, stated, as if that explained everything. We have a mandate. You have a mandate for delusion if you think that carries any weight beyond the borders of your precious manicured lawns. Hank shot back. He saw Emily flinch at his sharp tone and took a calming breath. Look, I suggest the three of you get back in your little golf cart patrol car and leave my property immediately before I file a formal complaint for trespassing and harassment with the county sheriff's department. And believe me, as the chief of police for the city of West Haven, my complaint will be taken very seriously. He had hoped the mention of his actual, legitimate law enforcement position would give them pause. It did. For a moment, the younger male officer's eyes widened slightly. Doris, however, seemed to double down. Perhaps she thought he was bluffing, or maybe her sense of self-importance was simply that inflated. Your position in West Haven is irrelevant here, Mr. Miller, Doris said, her voice dripping with condescension. This is an HOA matter. Mrs. Pruitt has rights. She felt threatened. Threatened by a 10-week-old puppy playing fetch 100 yards away from her. On private land she has no business being near, Hank scoffed. Give me a break. Janice Pruitt chose that moment to interject, her voice shrill. That dog is a menace. It was barking incessantly, and it could have rabies for all we know. It needs to be properly registered and controlled. That's what the HOA is for, to protect us from people like you and your feral animals. Feral, Hank repeated, his gaze locking onto Pruitt. Lady, the only thing feral around here is your attitude and your complete disregard for property lines and common decency. He turned back to the HOA officers. This is your final warning. Leave now. Doris, however, was not to be deterred. She took a step towards Emily and Daisy. We're taking the dog. You can appeal to the HOA board later. She reached for Daisy's collar. That was the line. Emily screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure terror, and tried to pull Daisy away. The puppy, frightened, snapped at Doris's outstretched hand, a tiny, harmless nip that barely made contact. It bit me. The animal is aggressive. Doris shrieked, recoiling dramatically. Though Hank could see no mark on her hand. Now we definitely have to take it. It's a dangerous dog. This was escalating, spiraling out of control because of one busybody neighbor and a power-tripping HOA official. Hank knew he had to de-escalate, but their blatant disregard for the law, for his rights, for his daughter's distress, was pushing him to his limit. He was a father first, and the sight of Emily's terror was a punch to the gut. Nobody is taking my dog, Emily cried, tears streaming down her face as she hugged Daisy tightly. Step aside, little girl, Doris commanded. Her face hardened. The two other officers moved to flank her, a ridiculous show of force against a child and a puppy. Hank stepped between them and his daughter. His voice, when he spoke, was no longer just firm, it was glacial. Touch my daughter or her dog, and I will personally ensure you face the full consequences of the law. Not your HOA make-believe rules, but actual state and county law regarding assault, trespass, and attempted theft of property. He saw a flicker of doubt in the younger officer's eyes, but Doris was resolute. Are you threatening us? Mr. Miller. I'm stating facts, Doris, Hank said, his eyes like chips of ice. You are acting outside of any legal authority. You are on my land without permission, attempting to unlawfully seize my property and causing distress to a minor. Those are facts, and soon. They will be facts listed in a sheriff's incident report. He knew this wasn't over. Karen Pruitt was practically vibrating with indignation in the background, and Doris looked like she was about to explode with self-righteous fury. He needed to get Emily and Daisy inside, away from these people. But he also knew he couldn't just let this go. This kind of overreach, this bullying, had to be stopped. Before he could usher Emily toward the house, Doris made her move. Fine. We'll wait for county animal control, and we'll be filing a complaint about your aggressive, unlicensed animal. And your threats. She pulled out a small, official-looking device, perhaps to take pictures or record. There is no unlicensed animal, Hank stated. Puppies under 4 months don't require a county license, and HOA licenses are irrelevant here. And I haven't threatened anyone. I've informed you of your illegal actions. He then looked pointedly at her recording device. And for the record, I am also recording this entire interaction. He tapped his chest where his off-duty concealed body cam, a habit from years on the force, was silently capturing everything. This gave Doris a slight pause, but Pruitt, ever the instigator, piped up. He's trying to intimidate you. Don't let him. That dog needs to be taken away for observation. It bit an officer. Hank looked at Doris's perfectly intact hand. Officer of what legitimate agency are you an officer? Doris. Because last I checked, HOA enforcer wasn't a sworn peace officer position in this state, or any state for that matter. He saw the younger male officer gulp. The charade was starting to crumble, but Doris was too invested in her power trip. She still held the leash she'd apparently brought with her, clearly intending to use it. We are designated community officers by the Bridal Creek Homeowners Association Charter, with the authority to enforce community standards for the safety and well-being of all residents. All residents within Bridal Creek, Hank emphasized. A boundary you crossed about a mile back. Now, for the last time, get off my property. It was then that Hank noticed movement further down his long driveway, a county sheriff's patrol car, and, to his utter disbelief, another Bridal Creek HOA vehicle pulling in behind it. Someone, likely Pruitt or Doris during the confrontation, had called them. This wasn't just a rogue HOA patrol. They were trying to use legitimate law enforcement to back their illegitimate claims. This was about to get a whole lot more complicated, and potentially a whole lot more serious. His mind raced. He was off duty, in civilian clothes, while he knew the sheriff, Mark Olson. This could quickly become a messy, she said, if not handled carefully. The sight of his daughter, still crying, holding her puppy, solidified his resolve. This ended now. The approaching sirens, a faint wail that grew steadily louder, confirmed Hank's sinking feeling. This was no longer a simple case of HOA overreach. It was escalating into a full-blown official incident, played out on his own front lawn. Sheriff Mark Olson's cruiser was first up the gravel driveway, closely followed by the second Bridal Creek HOA enforcement vehicle, which, to Hank's disgust, had its unnecessary light bar flashing. Olson, a man Hank had known professionally for years, a generally reasonable officer, stepped out of his car, his expression neutral as he surveyed the scene. Hank, clearly agitated despite his controlled demeanor. Emily, tear-streaked and clutching Daisy, the trio of HOA officers looking self-important, and Janice Pruitt, practically vibrating with a toxic brew of indignation and anticipation. Hank, what in the Sam Hill you going on out here? Olson asked, his gaze sweeping from Hank to the HOA contingent. Dispatch said something about a dog bite, aggressive animal, and a possible public disturbance involving an HOA. Before Hank could answer, Doris stepped forward, her clipboard held aloft like a shield of righteousness. Sheriff Olson, thank goodness you're here. We are officers from Bridal Creek Estates, HOA enforcement. We responded to a legitimate complaint from Mrs. Pruitt. She nodded toward the Janice. regarding an unlicensed and aggressive dog belonging to Mr. Miller. The animal subsequently bit me when I attempted to verify its registration and secure it as per our community regulations. She presented her hand, palm up, though there was still no visible mark. Mr. Miller then became verbally aggressive and threatened us. Janice Pruitt chimed in, her voice shrill and accusatory. That dog is a menace. Sheriff, it was running wild, barking. And she pointed a bony finger at Hank, is trying to use his position to intimidate everyone he claims to be some big-shot police chief. But he's acting like a thug, protecting that dangerous animal. Hank felt a surge of anger at the blatant lies and mischaracterizations, but he forced himself to remain outwardly calm. Emily, however, pressed closer to him, burying her face in his side, Daisy whimpering softly at her feet. The presence of another uniformed officer, the flashing lights, and the accusatory tone of the women were clearly terrifying her. Hank put a protective arm around his daughter. Mark, Hank began, his voice steady, let me give you the facts. This is my private property. These individuals, representing an HOA that has no jurisdiction here whatsoever, trespassed onto my land. They harassed my 8-year-old daughter and attempted to unlawfully seize her 10-week-old puppy. Daisy, there was no running wild. Daisy was playing fetch with Emily, well within my property lines. The bite Ms. Wade claims occurred was a reflexive puppy nip that didn't break the skin, if it even made contact, and only happened because she lunged for my daughter's dog without consent. I informed them they were trespassing and that their HOA rules are not applicable here. I did state my profession when they refused to leave and continued to escalate the situation. But I made no threats, only informed them of the legal ramifications of their actions. Olson listened, his expression unreadable. He knew Hank, knew his reputation as a by-the-book, level-headed lawman. But he also had a formal complaint, however dubious it might seem on the surface. Doris, you claim the dog bit you, he asked, turning to the HOA officer. Yes, Sheriff, it lunged and bit my hand. Doris insisted, maintaining her exaggerated posture of injury. It's clearly untrained and aggressive. According to Bridle Creek bylaws, such an animal must be impounded for observation. The second HOA vehicle had now disgorged 2 more enforcement officers, beefy men who looked more like bouncers than community standards officials. They stood silently behind Doris, an attempt at intimidation that Hank found both ludicrous and infuriating. This was a circus. Mark, this is unincorporated county land, Hank reiterated. Bridle Creek's bylaws are as relevant here as the rules of the local garden club. There is no county ordinance that this puppy has violated. She's under the age for rabies vaccination and licensing, and she was under supervision on private property. The only violations here are trespass and harassment. Committed by them, Hank gestured toward the HOA group, and I have the entire incident recorded. By the way, Olson raised an eyebrow slightly at the mention of a recording. Okay, Hank, let's all just take a step back and calm down. He looked at Emily, his expression softening a fraction. Ma'am, he said to Doris, do you require medical attention for this bite? Doris, perhaps realizing her bluff might be called, hesitated for a split second. Well, it's stinging, and I don't know if the animal has had its shots. She's a 10-week-old puppy, for God's sake, Hank interjected, exasperated. She hasn't even completed her puppy vaccination series yet because she's too young for some of them, a fact any competent animal control officer would know. And as for rabies, the earliest a puppy can typically get that shot is 12 weeks. This is a manufactured crisis. The younger male HOA officer from the initial trio, the one who had seemed hesitant earlier, looked increasingly uneasy. He glanced nervously at Doris and then at Sheriff Olson, but said nothing. Olson sighed. Okay, here's what I understand. We have a complaint about a potentially aggressive dog and a counter-complaint about trespassing. Ms. Pruitt, you initiated this by calling the HOA. I certainly did, Janice declared proudly. It's my right as a resident of Bridle Creek to live without fear of vicious animals from neighboring uncivilized properties. Hank bit back a retort about who was truly uncivilized. The insult to his home, his way of life, stung. This wasn't just about a puppy anymore. It was about a clash of cultures, a disdain for the rural lifestyle that had predated the manicured lawns of Bridal Creek by decades. And Bridal Creek HOA, you sent 3, now 5. Officers onto Mr. Miller's property based on this, Olson continued, his tone becoming a little more skeptical as he took in the almost comical show of force from the HOA. Doris stood firm. We were acting within our mandate to investigate a community standards violation that impacted one of our residents. Our jurisdiction extends to any nuisance emanating from properties adjacent to Bridal Creek that affect our residents' quality of life. This was the twist, the escalation in their audacity. Hank stared at her. That is an absolutely baseless and legally indefensible interpretation of HOA authority. You're claiming your HOA rules can somehow leapfrog property lines and impose themselves on landowners who are not members of your association and are not bound by your covenants. That's preposterous. It's in our expanded community charter, revised last quarter to address concerns about uncooperative adjacent landowners, Doris stated, a smug look on her face. She actually sounded like she believed her own nonsense. We have a copy in the vehicle if you'd like to see it. Sheriff, it outlines our authority to address external nuisances. Sheriff Olson looked from Doris to Hank, a frown now creasing his forehead. While he likely knew this was a stretch, the mention of a supposedly official document complicated things. He was a county sheriff, HOAs, while often problematic, did have internal governance documents proving their inapplicability here. In the heat of the moment, with a crying child and multiple agitated parties, was becoming a mire. Hank, Olson said, turning to him, while I understand your position on jurisdiction, if they genuinely believe they have some charter that gives them this perceived authority, however flawed, and there's an alleged bite, even a minor one, I might have to at least document this from an animal control perspective. Standard procedure. We might need to have animal control come out and make an assessment, verify the puppy's health. Hank's heart sank. This was exactly what he'd feared. The system, designed to be impartial, could be manipulated by determined bullies willing to twist rules and tell lies. Emily's grip tightened on his hand, her small body trembling. The thought of Daisy being taken, even temporarily, for observation based on these fabricated claims, was unbearable. He could see the triumphant glint in Janice Pruitt's eyes and the smug satisfaction on Doris's face. They were winning, not through law or reason, but through sheer, unadulterated gall and the exploitation of bureaucratic process. Mark, Hank said, his voice low and urgent, you know me. You know I wouldn't have an aggressive animal. You know I uphold the law. These people are manufacturing a situation. If animal control has to come out here, it will traumatize my daughter further and lend credence to their baseless accusations. Their charter is irrelevant to my property rights. Olson rubbed the back of his neck. I get it, Hank, I really do. But I have to follow protocol when a bite is alleged and an official complaint is made, especially when one party is citing their own governing documents. However shaky they might seem to an outsider, it becomes a civil matter to sort out the jurisdictional dispute. But the animal complaint, that's a different pathway. This was the moment Hank knew words alone, even from him, in civilian attire, were not going to be enough. They were using the system against him, banking on the appearance of legitimacy. Doris and her team were puffed up with their perceived authority. Backed by their revised charter, Janice Pruitt was reveling in the chaos she had instigated, and his daughter was terrified. He looked at Emily's tear-streaked face, her eyes pleading with him. He looked at Daisy, a tiny, bewildered creature caught in a storm of human pettiness. And he looked at the smug faces of Doris and Janice. A cold, hard resolve settled in him. He was not just Hank Miller, ranch owner, anymore. He was Chief Hank Miller. And these people were about to understand the difference between HOA fantasy and the full, Unyielding power of actual law. Sheriff Olson, Hank said, his voice now devoid of any pleading, replaced by a steely calm. Before you call animal control, and before these individuals from Bridal Creek HOA take another step or utter another word on my property, I need to make a phone call, and then I need to change my shirt. He met Olson's eyes. Give me 4 minutes. Can you maintain the peace here, on my sovereign property, for 4 minutes? Sheriff, Olson looked surprised by the shift in Hank's tone. It wasn't aggressive, but it was intensely authoritative. The voice of a man who was done negotiating and was about to take definitive action. He saw something in Hank's eyes, a lifetime of command. That made him nod slowly. All right, Hank, 4 minutes, but make it quick. This situation needs resolving. Hank gave Emily's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Stay with Sheriff Olson. Sweetie, don't worry. Daddy will handle this. He turned and strode towards his house, his mind already working. He wasn't just going to change his shirt. He was going to put on his uniform. He was going to retrieve his badge, his sidearm, and a copy of the actual county and state statutes that these HOA vigilantes were so flagrantly ignoring. The game was about to change, drastically. He punched a number into his phone as he walked. Sarah, he said when the call connected to his deputy chief, I need you to do an immediate records check on Bridal Creek Estates HOA, specifically any charters or amendments filed with the county or state regarding enforcement jurisdiction outside their platted boundaries. And I need to know if Doris Wade, Janice Pruitt, or their HOA enforcement officers have any prior complaints or legal actions against them for harassment or overreach. Expedite it. The 4 minutes were ticking. The 4 minutes Hank had requested stretched taut with unspoken tension. Sheriff Olson, true to his word, kept the peace. Though it was a fragile one, he positioned himself subtly between the HOA contingent and Emily, who stood small and vulnerable, clutching Daisy, her eyes fixed on the door through which her father had disappeared. Doris Wade and her reinforced team of officers muttered amongst themselves, their confidence slightly eroded by Olson's professional neutrality and Hank's sudden, decisive departure. Janice Pruitt, however, remained a wellspring of indignation, occasionally muttering about special treatment and delays of justice inside the house. Hank moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who had donned a uniform thousands of times. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't just a routine shift. It was a reclamation of authority, a shield for his family, and a weapon against injustice. The crisp fabric of his West Haven police chief uniform, the weight of his badge pinned precisely over his heart, the familiar heft of his holstered Glock. Each element settled into place, transforming him. He wasn't just Emily's dad anymore, or Hank Miller, the rancher. He was Chief Miller, an embodiment of the very laws these people were so contemptuously flouting. His phone buzzed. It was Sarah, his deputy chief. Chief, she said, her voice crisp. Got that info for you. Bridal Creek Estates HOA filed an amendment to their internal charter last quarter. Like you suspected, it's full of grandiose language about maintaining community harmony and addressing external nuisances impacting resident well-being. However, and this is crucial, it was never filed with, nor approved by, any county or state regulatory body. Legally, it's about as binding on non-members as a strongly worded letter to Santa Claus. It's purely an internal document with no external enforcement power whatsoever beyond their own platted property lines. A grim satisfaction settled on Hank. And the individuals. Doris Wade has 2 prior harassment complaints filed against her by residents within Bridal Creek, both dismissed by the HOA board she likely controls. Janice Pruitt has a documented history of initiating frivolous complaints, noise, pets, unkempt lawns against her own neighbors. Seems she's a serial antagonizer. The officers with Wade. A quick check shows a couple of them have expired security guard licenses. Nothing that would grant them any authority outside a private security contract. And certainly not peace officer status. Perfect, Sarah, thank you. Email me the summaries, Hank instructed. He slipped his phone into his pocket, took a deep breath, and straightened his shoulders. He grabbed a copy of the state penal code concerning trespass, impersonating a public servant, and harassment, along with the county ordinance on animal control, which clearly stated jurisdiction and licensing requirements, armed with truth, law, and legitimate authority. He strode back out into the sunlight. The transformation was immediate and palpable. When Hank stepped back onto the porch, no longer in civilian attire, but in the full, imposing uniform of the chief of police, a stunned silence fell over the assembled group. Even Sheriff Olson blinked, a flicker of understanding and perhaps a little relief crossing his face. The 5 HOA enforcement officers visibly recoiled. Their pseudo-uniforms suddenly looked cheap and clownish, next to Hank's authentic regalia. Doris Wade's jaw, which had been set in a smug line, went slack. Janice Pruitt's indignant sputtering died in her throat, replaced by a wide-eyed stare. Hank didn't say a word initially. He simply walked down the porch steps and stood before them, his presence radiating an authority that no HOA charter, however creatively written, could ever bestow. Emily, seeing her father not just as daddy but as the powerful, uniformed figure he now was, felt a surge of hope. She straightened up a little, her tears momentarily forgotten. "Sheriff Olson," Hank began, his voice calm, resonant, and utterly uncompromising. "Thank you for maintaining order. I believe I can clarify a few things now." He turned his attention to Doris Wade, his gaze direct and piercing. "Ms. Wade, I have some information for you. First, let's address your expanded community charter. My office has just confirmed with county records that this document, which you claim gives you authority over my property, was never filed with, nor approved by, any relevant county or state governing body. It is an internal HOA document with absolutely zero legal standing or enforcement power beyond the platted boundaries of Bridal Creek Estates. Therefore, your presence on my property and any attempt to enforce your HOA rules here constitutes criminal trespass." Doris paled. The bluster seemed to drain out of her. Now, wait a minute." Hank raised a hand, silencing her. "Second, regarding your officers, a quick check reveals that some of your personnel may be operating with expired security credentials, and none of you possess peace officer status or any legitimate law enforcement authority. Your uniforms, vehicles, and titles like HOA enforcement officer, particularly when operating outside your jurisdiction and attempting to detain citizens or seize property, could be construed as impersonating a public servant, a serious offense." The 2 beefy officers who had arrived in the second vehicle exchanged uneasy glances. The younger officer from the initial trio looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him. "Third," Hank continued, his voice hardening, "your claim of being bitten by a 10-week-old puppy, which you are using as a pretext to seize said puppy, is, in my professional assessment as a law enforcement officer with considerable experience, highly dubious, particularly given the lack of any visible injury and your immediate escalation. Filing a false report with a law enforcement officer," he looked pointedly at Sheriff Olson, then back at Doris, "is also a criminal offense." He then addressed Janice Pruitt directly, who seemed to be shrinking under his gaze. "Mrs. Pruitt, my office has also been made aware of a pattern of frivolous complaints you have filed, while you have the right to report legitimate concerns. Initiating false or vexatious complaints can constitute harassment." Hank paused, letting his words sink in. He then held up the documents he carried. "I have here copies of the relevant state and county statutes pertaining to trespass, impersonating an officer, harassment, and animal control. I suggest you familiarize yourselves with them." "Sheriff Olson," he turned, "I am now formally requesting that you take action regarding these individuals for criminal trespass onto my property. I also wish to file a formal complaint regarding harassment by Miss Wade and Ms. Pruitt and the potential impersonation of public servants by these HOA enforcement officers. And I will be submitting my body camera footage. and the information from my deputy chief as evidence. Sheriff Olson, who had been listening intently, nodded slowly. The arrival of Chief Miller, in full uniform, armed with specific legal statutes and verified information, had completely shifted the dynamic. The HOA's position, already shaky, had crumbled. Understood, Chief Miller, Olson said, his voice now carrying a new note of formality. He turned to Doris and her team. Ma'am, based on the information provided by Chief Miller in the jurisdictional boundaries, it appears you and your officers are indeed trespassing. I'm going to have to ask you and your team to vacate Mr. Miller's property immediately. We will take your statements regarding your initial complaint down at the county line. But any further action by your HOA regarding this property must go through official legal channels, not unilateral enforcement actions. Doris Wade opened her mouth, then closed it. The fight had gone out of her. The authority she had clung to had evaporated. Her officers were already backing away, eager to disassociate themselves from the rapidly deteriorating situation. And Ms. Wade, Hank added, his voice like ice, be aware that I will also be consulting with my attorney regarding civil action against Bridal Creek Estates HOA for harassment, trespass, attempted unlawful seizure of property, and emotional distress caused to my minor daughter. Your revised charter might become a very expensive piece of paper for your association. The threat of personal and organizational liability, delivered by a police chief who clearly had the means and intent to follow through, was the final nail in the coffin of their misguided crusade. Janice Pruitt looked like she might faint. The color had drained from her face, replaced by a sickly green. Her anticipated victory had turned into a public humiliation and a potential legal nightmare. Now, no, Sheriff Olson said, his voice firm, addressing the HOA contingent. You heard Chief Miller. Off the property. Now. The HOA officers, including a now subdued Doris, began a hasty retreat towards their vehicles. Their earlier arrogance replaced by a mixture of fear and resentment. Janice Pruitt, after one last venomous glare at Hank, scurried after them. Hank watched them go, his expression unyielding. He then knelt beside Emily, who finally broke into a smile, albeit a watery one. See? Pumpkins, Feb, he said softly, gently stroking Daisy's soft fur. Daddy told you he'd handle it. Justice, he thought, sometimes needed a uniform, a badge, and an unshakable resolve to make itself known. But the fight wasn't entirely over. The retreat of the HOA was a victory, but the underlying issues of their overreach and the distress they'd caused still needed to be addressed through proper channels. He would ensure they were. The retreat of the Bridal Creek Estates HOA vehicles, kicking up a cloud of ignominious dust as they sped away from Hank's ranch, was immensely satisfying. Sheriff Mark Olson remained for a few minutes more, taking a formal statement from Hank. His demeanor now one of professional respect mixed with a touch of wry amusement at how thoroughly Hank had dismantled the HOA's offensive. Well, Chief, Olson said, snapping his notebook shut, I don't think you'll be getting any more community standards visits from Bridal Creek anytime soon. You certainly laid down the law. Quite literally. Hank allowed himself a faint smile. Just ensuring the law is applied correctly. Mark, and protecting my family. They picked the wrong ranch, the wrong dawn, and the wrong dad. He looked over at Emily, who was now giggling as Daisy chased a butterfly in the sunshine. The earlier trauma already beginning to recede, replaced by the resilience of childhood. That sight was worth more than any legal victory. I'll file this report, and it will be on record with the county, Olson assured him. If they or Ms. Pruitt attempt any further harassment, it'll strengthen your case considerably. And I'll have a chat with animal control. Make sure they understand the situation if any spurious reports come from that quarter. Appreciate that, Mark, Hank said, shaking his hand. As Olson drove off, a sense of quiet triumph settled over the ranch. The immediate threat was gone, but Hank knew this wasn't just about one isolated incident. The arrogance and sense of entitlement displayed by Doris Wade and her HOA, fueled by Janice Pruitt's meddling, were symptomatic of a larger issue: HOAs overstepping their bounds. Believing their internal rules superseded actual law and individual property rights. His encounter was a stark example, but he suspected many others had been bullied into submission by similar tactics. In the days that followed, Hank, with the meticulousness of a seasoned investigator and the determination of a protective father, pursued every avenue. His attorney drafted a formidable cease and desist letter to the Bridal Creek Estates HOA, detailing their illegal trespass, harassment, attempted unlawful seizure, and the emotional distress inflicted on Emily. The letter explicitly stated that any further contact, direct or indirect, outside of formal legal correspondence through their respective attorneys, would result in immediate legal action, including claims for significant damages. Simultaneously, Hank filed a formal complaint with the state agency responsible for overseeing private security licenses, citing the expired credentials of some of Doris Wade's officers and the HOA's misrepresentation of their authority. He also provided his body cam footage and Deputy Chief Sarah's findings to Sheriff Olson, ensuring a robust official record of the incident. The response from the Bridal Creek HOA was telling. Within a week, Hank's attorney received a letter, not from an aggressive HOA lawyer ready for a fight, but from a chastened HOA board president, a different individual than Doris Wade, who, Hank later heard, had been asked to step back from enforcement duties. The letter offered a carefully worded, though somewhat grudging, apology for the misunderstanding and overzealousness of their representatives. It assured Hank that the HOA board was reviewing its policies, particularly regarding enforcement activities near non-member properties, and that their personnel would receive further training on jurisdictional limits. They made no admission of guilt, but implicitly conceded defeat by their conciliatory tone and their conspicuous silence on the validity of their expanded charter. Janice Pruitt, perhaps realizing the potential legal jeopardy she was in for filing false complaints and harassment, became notably reclusive. The gossip mill in Bridal Creek, initially fueled by her dramatic and wildly inaccurate accounts of the incident, soon turned against her as whispers of Chief Miller's decisive actions and the HOA's subsequent backtracking spread. Her reign as the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer of petty grievances came to an abrupt and rather humiliating end. For Hank, the true victory wasn't in the HOA's retreat or Pruitt's comeuppance, satisfying as those were. It was in the restored peace of mind for his daughter. Emily was soon back to her joyful self, playing with Daisy without a shadow of fear. The ranch was once again their sanctuary. A few weeks later, Hank attended a county commissioners meeting. During the public comment period, he spoke, not as Police Chief Miller of West Haven this time, but as Hank Miller, private citizen and ranch owner. He recounted the incident, calmly and factually, highlighting the dangers of HOA overreach and the need for clear county ordinances that protected property owners from such abuses, especially those living in unincorporated areas adjacent to aggressive HOAs. He proposed a good neighbor ordinance that would clarify jurisdictional boundaries and establish penalties for HOAs attempting to enforce their rules outside their legal territory or using tactics that constituted harassment. His words, coming from a respected figure in law enforcement who had personally experienced such an issue, carried significant weight. Several commissioners expressed concern, and the county council was tasked with researching the matter and drafting potential ordinance language. The tide was turning, not just for Hank, but potentially for many others. The hero's rise was not a dramatic, singular event, but a steady application of law, reason, and resolve. Hank hadn't needed to shout or physically overpower anyone. His power came from his knowledge, his position used judiciously, and his unwavering commitment to protecting his family and his rights. The villain's fall was equally undramatic but decisive. Doris Wade was sidelined, her authority exposed as hollow. Janice Pruitt was silenced by her own potential liability, and the Bridal Creek HOA was forced into a humiliating retreat and policy review, their ambitions checked by the unyielding boundary of the law. Life on the ranch returned to its familiar rhythms. Daisy grew, no longer a tiny puppy, but a gangly adolescent dog, her barks now deeper, her enthusiasm for fetch undiminished. Emily's laughter echoed across the pastures. Hank, watching them one evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, felt a profound sense of contentment. He had faced down the Karen, the overzealous HOA, and the flawed system they tried to exploit. He had shown up in uniform, not just as a symbol of power, but as a defender of simple justice, a guardian of his home, and in doing so, he had ensured that his little corner of the world remained a place of peace, freedom, and joyful. Unlicensed puppy tumbles, the law, when wielded with integrity, was indeed a powerful shield,